Hi guys, and if you're watching this video, you're most likely about to buy a Lotus Elise. And believe me, they are fun cars, they are great cars to drive, they have terrific road holding, they are fast, and they're quite easy to maintain. They are not very complex. But the Lotus Elise S2 hasn't been built since quite a while, so if you're going out on the market and look for one, you're going to end up with, at best, a second-hand one, but even a third, fourth, or fifth hand. And that is often a bit of a problem because not everybody is taking care of his Lotus Elise as they should. They will be abused, they will be used on tracks, they will be modified, whatever you have. And to be very honest, I really recommend that you try to find one which is as original as possible. So if you're planning to use the Elise as your daily commuter car, then I don't think that's a good idea. They are not comfortable. They are very hard. The seats are very tough because it's a sports car. It's almost like a race car. So you get the go-kart feeling. So if you're looking for comfort for your daily commuting, don't do it. Unless you're a young guy, then you can deal with all this. But if you're a seasoned guy like me, then you really don't want to drive it that way. You want to have some more comfort. So it's more kind of a weekend car, kind of a hobby car. But then again, I leave that up to you. The other thing is that if you're a tall guy, more than 1 meter 80, it's going to be tough to get in and out because inside they are really small. And I'll show you that in a minute, how hard it is to get in. And even this one has the top removed. So you can imagine if you are having the top on, how that will look like in the city or wherever you go when you're trying to get out and you're a tall guy, how you have to squeeze yourself into it. You know, it's not a pretty sight. So you might want to think about it. And if you're a bit overweight, in fact, if you are overweight, then this is not the car for you because you just are not going to fit in it. I mean, the seats are very narrow and you'll see that in a minute. So let's have a look how easy it is to get in and out of the Lotus Elise, and let's look on the seats and let's look a bit at the interior because it is a very Spartan car. And don't get me wrong, I love it. It's a great sports car. It has that genuine racing character in it, and that's what we all like about it. And if that's what you're looking for, then go after one. If that's not what you're looking for, then you might as well stop watching this video because it's not going to help you much. So let's have a look. So I have removed the soft top on this one just to give you a better sight inside, but this is normally where the roof sits, so you see how much space you have. So there isn't a lot of space. If you look on the seats, I mean, they are really hard, and notice how wide they are. They are not really wide at all. I mean, if you're a big guy, you're not going to fit. All right, so let me show you how hard it can be to get in, and that's even with the roof removed. So normally you would slide in like this, and then you let yourself down in the seat, and then take your other leg inside. And then you would move the seat forward. In fact, it was already forward, and that's it. There's not much space in it. And I don't have the passenger seat with me. I took it out because I'm cleaning that out. But you can see how simple the dashboard is, how Spartan it all is. You know, and if you look at me, I'm not a very tall guy, but I just barely fit in the seat. I have almost nothing left on the sides, just about this much, a few centimeters. So if you're a bit wider than me, you're going to be pressed into that seat, which is probably good because you want to drive fast and take fast corners. So you're very well held in place by the chair. You can slide the seat forward or backward, but not that far, see? You don't have that much play. So for tall folks, you always have to move the seat back to get out. And remember, the roof is right here, so not easy. So if you're one of those guys that is tall and not very flexible and maybe a bit overweight, it may be a bit tough to get in and out. But okay, enough of that. So let me show you now around the car how it looks like. Because if you go in for your vehicle, you will have clamshells on it. Here on this one, I have the clamshells removed. So you can actually have a look what's under it, so you know where to look for it. So I'm going to be talking a bit about the motor, the transmission, you know, the suspension, the brakes, all these little things. So let's take a tour around the car. And watch me suffering getting out because I'm an old guy. In the front of the car you have your radiator, which is sitting inside this shroud. Then you have the crash box, which is very expensive if you have to replace that. And then you have the brake cylinders and a lot of electronics in here. And you can actually access some of that through the panels which are sitting on the top. If you have to work on the radiator or you have a bad radiator, then you have to take off the clamshell and get to it. So it's a bit of work. So it's always expensive because working hours are expensive. So now let me take you to the back of the car. That's where the engine is. So here you have it. The engine is in the back. It's a lateral engine. You cannot get to it very easily because normally there's a cover here and you need to lift that up and then you have access to it, but it's very tough to get at it. So working on it is always a pain in the butt, let's face that. So remember that you will have sore knuckles whenever you work on your Lotus Elise engine. So if you don't mind about that, then just go and buy one, otherwise don't. Anyhow, just kidding. But the Lotus Elise, the S2, has two types of engines. It has the K Rover engine, which is this one, and then it has as well the Toyota engine. Different engines, different weak spots, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, the engine. Let me first start talking about the K engine. It's a very good engine built by Rover. However, it's driven by a distribution belt, and this is a distribution belt that came off one of those engines. And the distribution belt is behind this cover. And it's connected between the crankshaft and the camshafts. And that belt has to be changed every 70,000 kilometers or every 5 years. So if you're out there looking for a Lotus Elise, ask the owner, when was the last time that the timing belt was changed? Now, if he's not able to answer that question, then he probably never replaced it. If he says he replaced it, then he should remember how expensive it was and how hard it was to do it. Because you have to remove the engine mount, you have to remove the pulley in the back to change all that, to change the timing belt. If he claims that he did it himself, then ask him for the special tools that you require to lock the camshaft. If he hasn't any of that or has no clue, then he is lying. And then I would note on my little scratch pad, minus 700 euros, because that's the price it's going to cost you to get the timing belt replaced by a professional. At the same time, we typically replace the water pump. This is the water pump, a very small piece because the timing belt runs over that. And once you've got the cover removed for the timing belt, you might as well change out the water pump so to avoid any failures. And at the same time, there is a tensioner. This tensioner still looks pretty good, which is putting the tension up onto the belt, and all that stuff is behind this cover. So afterwards, even if you have to change the water pump, you have to take all this off. And believe me, it is not easy. So 700 euros for that. This is a weak spot of the Lotus Elise. And if it's not done, you should do it when you buy one if there is any doubt that the guy in question has never changed it. A lot of people lie about this. The second issue with this engine is a blown head gasket. It's quite common. And the reason for that is that the thermostat, and this is the thermostat, is sitting at the return or the cold water going into the engine, and normally the thermostat is closed when the engine is cold. And it opens up as soon as the engine gets warmer, so it can cool and circulate the water from the front radiator through the water pump, through the engine block, and then back to have it cooled. The problem is then when the engine is cold, the thermostat is closed, and with a closed thermostat, there is no circulation of water around the engine or inside the engine. So if you drive the vehicle very fast from the beginning and you don't let it warm up, then the engine will get very hot and it won't be cooled until the thermostat opens up. Now, the heat that has been created by the engine has to propagate through the water all the way to the front end of the radiator and then back and then hit the thermostat, and then the thermostat will open up. But once it opens up, it's going to cause a thermoshock on the cylinder head because the water is a lot colder than actually the temperature of the cylinder head. And in fact, if you really push down the throttle and you really demand a lot of power and you actually abuse the car from the start when it's cold, you have given it time to warm up, that cylinder head will be very hot and you're going to get thermoshock, and then after a few times it will blow the cylinder head gasket. This is a well-known problem. Now for that there is a cure, and that is a special kit that will fix that with different tubing, and I'll show you that in a second. Now, of course, you won't know how the driver drove the car, but there is quite often an indication on the dipstick. If you see white spots on the dipstick, that's typically an indication that he's been forcing the car when it was cold and it actually was almost suffering from overheating during that short cycle. So that's something you need to check, and we'll check the oil in a few minutes. Now, I would look for the modification of the cooling system on those Lotus Elises and as well on the Toyotas. And let me show you close up what you should be looking for. If that modification is in place, then you're good. If it's not, then I would recommend that you put it in, but put it on your debit list as a €250 cost. Because that's what it's going to cost you, even if you do it yourself. So let me show you up close where you need to look for it. On the left-hand side of the engine bay, you will find the cooling liquid reservoir, and under that you should find this white pot. This is the one. And that white pot, that is the mechanism or the modification kit that prevents the head gasket to blow, especially when it's used under heavy load when the engine is cold. So that is a very positive modification to have. So the thermostat housing modification is a very positive modification, and it's really recommended. But be very careful with other modifications on the engine. A lot of people will claim that the engine is modified, it has so many more horsepower. These are not good things, believe me. If Lotus built the engine to a certain performance level, there had a reason for that. I mean, of course, every engine you can crank up and produce more power, but it will cost you on longevity and reliability on the engine. So I wouldn't buy an engine which has been tuned. It also means that the owner probably did some track days with it, so I would rather, walk away from that car. But on the other hand, if you're an expert and you know exactly what you're looking at, then okay, no issue for that. I mean, I cannot say that you may not buy that car. It's just what I would recommend to you if you were a novice buyer or an average buyer for a Lotus Elise. Okay, so these were the main 2 points on that engine that you really, for the rest the engine is quite good. Of course you should check the cooling liquid, that it's nice and clear, and you should check the oil. And so let's have a look on the dipstick on how that looks like. So the dipstick is to be found on the right hand side of the engine. It's this yellow thingy. It could be another color on yours, it depends a bit. And then let's pull it out and have a look how that looks like. And as you can see, the oil is nice and clear, not black at all. There's no white foam on it. So if you see white foam on it, stay clear of the engine, because that means that there's a water leak and water is leaking into the oil. If you see white spots on the stick anywhere, that actually means that the owner has been forcing the engine very heavily when it was cold, and it's actually subject to blowing the head gasket, as I just explained before. So that would be an indication on how you could spot that the owner wasn't careful enough. So as far as the engine goes, this is about it. There is also a kit for the Toyota engine to protect the head gasket to blow. So the two kits exist. The Toyota engine is less of an issue. It's a very rigid engine. It doesn't have the timing belt, so you're quite all right on that one. But still, check the cooling liquid, check the dipstick, make sure everything is okay as I explained. And then the next thing is we'll start looking a bit at the gearbox. But first of all, I like to mention one more thing. A lot of people will tell you that, hey, you know what, this car has a modified exhaust. We have the sports exhaust on it. To be honest, that's not added value whatsoever. And some people will try to tell you that, hey, we've got a sports exhaust on our Lotus Elise and it's so much better, and they pretend it's kind of added value. In essence, it is not added value, because these sports exhausts, like this one is a non-original one, are cheaper than the original Lotus exhaust systems. And a sports exhaust doesn't bring any added horsepower unless you modify the exhaust manifold, and in most cases that hasn't happened. They just put a sport exhaust on because it sounds nicer and it's cheaper to buy. So that's in most cases the reason why that it's on those Lotus Elises. Now, it doesn't do no harm, so don't get me wrong, but don't pay more for it, because it's not justifiable to pay more for that part. So far we've been doing a lot of static checks on the engine. We haven't done anything on the gearbox yet, but that's coming in a few minutes. But first of all, we will read out now the error codes that exist on the ECU. Because the ECU in the back of the Lotus Elise is registering all the readings from all the different sensors, and it's logging actually faults as they occur in the engine. So if you can read that out, then you have a pretty good indication of what the cost will be to fix those. There should be no error codes. And if you do have error codes, then there may be something wrong. Now, you will need a little tool for that. And let me show you what this tool is about. So this is a very cheap OBD2 reader. It doesn't cost a lot, about 40 euros, and it's worthwhile the investment, because you can use it on any type of car to read out the basic error codes. This is the connector, which you need to plug in to the OBD2 plug, which is underneath your dashboard. And that is a bit difficult to get at, but let me show you where that sits. So underneath the dashboard, all the way in the end, that's where the OBD plug is, really, really comfortable. And then you just need to plug in the plug, and then you can read out the code. So let me plug that in for you so we can have a look. All right, guys, I've got the meter plugged in, and as soon as you plug it in, you get a message saying turn the ignition on. So that's what we are about to do. Make sure the car, don't start it, okay? Just turn on the ignition. There you go. And then press any key as whatever the device tells you. It may be different on yours, so I'm going to press any key. Now it's going to scan for the correct protocol. I can now read the codes, and I'm going to read the codes, the stored codes, and I will select Lotus, obviously. And as you can see, you can deal with many different cars, so it's not a lost investment. Enter. So, it found one code, a P1402, and it found another code. So it actually found two codes for that, because those are proprietary codes. But for the rest, it didn't found any other code. So as you could see, we had two error codes on this vehicle, and they were undefined standard codes because they're Lotus unique, and that's a little bit of the problem with OBD2 and manufacturers. They always create private codes and so on. But you can look it up on Lotus manuals, and in those two codes that I had here were actually related to a airco problem. Now this car doesn't have an airco. And the second problem was related to the ventilator or the fan on the radiator not running. Now, I know that's not the case because it is running. It's just that the sensor isn't really working, or the feedback mechanism doesn't work. So these are two small things that really have no effect on the car, but they are error codes. So the airco is something you need to think about, because it means somebody has programmed it in, and Maybe the ECU was changed one moment in time, who knows, and they programmed it wrong, but it doesn't do no harm. Now, if you have other codes, more standard codes that are having a problem, then you can read out in clear text what the real problem is. So that's the good thing. So let's do a few more things now. Let's check the gearbox and start the car. So if you're going to check a car out, I really recommend that you make sure that the engine is cold. So put your hand on the engine and make sure it's cold. If the engine is warm, that means that the owner knew you were coming and he already started the car before you, maybe to hide some issues, I don't know. That's something I'm always very aware of, that the engine has to be cold. If it's warm, tell him that you will come back when the engine is cold, or you wait until the engine is cold. Now, the gearboxes. Now, the gearbox is very rigid. It's a very good gearbox on the K motor, but also the Toyota one. Now, the Toyota gearbox has a bit of a problem between second and third gear. The synchro meshes can wear out rather quickly on those. But that's what you need to find out when you do the road test. Now, the stick shift. The Lotus Elise controls the gearbox, the shifting of the gears with the stick shift, and there's a cabling system inside. And you can check one of my videos on how all that works. And these cables tend to wear out. That's another weak spot. And then it becomes very difficult to actually select the gears. So try out and see if you can select the gears very easily, like so. Now here it works fine. And in idle position, the stick shift should go back between third and fourth gear in the center position. That's where it should go. If it doesn't, then you probably have worn out cables on the gearbox. And I'll show you that in a few minutes in the back. All right, for the rest, there is not much to be said about it, except that you want to start the car. Now, starting the car, you always will have an alarm system, and you can see the blinking light, and I hope you can see it. So you need the fob or this alarm fob, and always make sure you have two. Ask them for two, because if you lost one, then you can order a second one, but without it you might be lost. And it's going to cost you about 150 euros. So put that back on your debit list if he doesn't have a second one. So let's turn it off. It's turned off, and let's crank up the engine, and it should start very easily. And as you can tell, it starts immediately. It revs around 1200, 1100, but it should fall down to about 800 RPMs. And now you let it run. Let it sit there for a while, and check that the temperature comes up properly. The temperature should be around 82 degrees centigrade when the engine is at its normal working temperature. So just let it sit there. Now, initially, when the engine is cold, you're not going to have a display. It's going to take a few seconds or minutes before it actually starts reading something. And when the engine is a little bit warmer, then you can throttle up a bit and then let the pedal go, and the engine should nicely fall back to 800 RPM. If it does not, you may have a throttle housing problem on the engine, but that is quite uncommon, but it does happen sometimes. If the engine doesn't start, well, that's no good. That's really an issue. Now, you still might have your tester connected, like I do, and now actually we can check some live data. Let's check the temperature. Right now, temperature is about 77 degrees centigrade. And you can also see it on your dashboard, by the way. And it's going to go up to about 78, and it's going to keep going up, and it should stabilize around 82 degrees centigrade. So that is a pretty good test you can do with this little tester. You can check other things as well. And on some of the testers will allow you to check the live data, so you can read the different values of the map and the math and all that. But that's stuff, really stuff, if you really want to get deep into it, that you want to do, but not in this case. So I'm going to let the engine run now for a little bit, and then we'll check the temperature if it stabilizes around 82 degrees centigrade. Now, while we wait, there is one more thing you might want to check while you're in the cabin, is that the brake pedal feels very firm. And put your foot on it, and keep your foot on it, keep pressing, and it should not sink down. It should feel like a rock almost. The other thing is the clutch. Depress the clutch pedal, put it in gear, and let the clutch come upwards, and it should start picking up around 1/3 release. So not all the way at the end and not all the way at the beginning, because that wouldn't be very good. So let's check the brakes out. Now the brakes are pretty good on the Lotus Elise. However, if the car has been used on track days, then the discs will be worn out. So check the discs and make sure that the thickness of the disc is still 25 millimeters. If it's less than that, put 600 euros down on your scratch pad. Check also the calipers in the front. The Lotus Elise is fitted with AP Racing calipers. In the back is Rambo. And check the flexible cables, so the flexible hoses, that they are still intact and good. Now the brake pads themselves should have a minimum thickness of 2.5 millimeters. Check the brake fluid, that it's actually clear and not polluted, and ask the guy when it was changed last time. So as you can see, this is pretty clear, crystal clear brake fluid, and ask him when it was changed last time, because it should be changed every year because it absorbs water. If the guy tells you that they have silicone based brake fluid in it, not good. The Lotus Elise shouldn't have that. They should have DOT4 braking fluid in it. You can get access to this part through the access panel in front of the clamshell, so you have to remove that and then you can get to it. We looked on the discs, and the discs, they can come in many different sizes, but typically the original one would have solid discs, solid metal discs. They wouldn't be aluminum, they would not be perforated, but they may have fitted others, because discs do wear out. It's a consumable on a car. But whatever is on the car, check that the disc is having the right thickness of 25 millimeters and that there are no deep grooves in the surface. So if you find a groove in it, deep grooves, that means that the owner did not in time replace the brake pads, and he pushed through the protective layer of the brake pads and he scratched the discs. In that case, you will have to replace the brake pads and the discs. So then you should put in your notepad at least another 800 euros of cost. So all that I said so far about cost, you should deduct from the final price. Okay, good. One last thing we need to check on the brakes is the rear brakes, because that's based on a self-adjusting caliper in the back, but with a brake cable, and the manual brake, which is sitting in the cockpit, should only have a few notches upwards and not more than that, and it should brake very well. Now the cables tend to corrode badly over time, so let's have a look on that. So I jacked up the car a bit, and with the protective plate removed, you will see here the manual brake cables, and that's where the corrosion is happening. You need to check on that, especially where the cable fits into the metal part. That's really a bad spot, and you can only see it when the panel is removed. And the same brake cable terminates on the rear caliper, and that's as well where you find corrosion. You may take a plier and pull it back a bit and make sure that none of the steel strains are actually broken. With the rear panel removed, you can also see the gearbox shifting mechanism. That's these cables right here, and they should be in pretty good shape. If not, you will be facing shifting problems. That's what I showed you before, and that's something to be checked out. Again, you can only see this when you remove the diffuser and the rear protection panel. And while we're under the car, you may as well check for leaks on the gearbox and on the engine, and they should be all dry. In fact, you should only look at the inside of that protective shield that we removed, and if there's oil spots or drips on that one, then you know something is leaking, and you need to have a closer look of what the problem really is. So the next thing to inspect is the suspension. Now the Lotus Elise is fitted with Wishbones, and this is a Wishbone. There's one on the top, there's one on the bottom, the same thing happens in the back. And these Wishbones should not be bent or cracked, and they should not be heavily corroded either. The Wishbones are mounted on aluminum. This is aluminum body, and it's not uncommon to see that aluminum body being damaged and getting thin. In fact, even broken off on some sides. So if you see that, then stay clear of the car, because that is not good whatsoever and very hard to fix. In fact, it's almost impossible to fix. So check that part at least on the front bushes, where the bolts are sticking in, that there's no wear and tear really on the aluminum. Do it both on the top and on the bottom wishbones, because that is very important. So the other part to check are the ball joints, and they are fitted at the end of the wishbones on the top and on the bottom. There's two of them, and they should be intact. There should be nothing wrong with it. There should be no play on it. And here's an old one. That's how it looks like. And in fact, I replaced all of them on this vehicle because I just could. The best way to do this is actually to put the car on a jack and then actually try to swivel the wheel back and forth, you know, and see if there's any play anywhere. And you shouldn't see no play whatsoever. If you feel play, then you need to count at least about 200 euros per side per wheel to fix the bushes and the ball joints. If you do it yourself, if you get it done, it's going to be quite more expensive, because these bushes are very hard to get in and out, and it's very labor intensive. So once you've checked the wishbones and they all look good, there are no cracks, they're not bent, the bushes are good, and you hear no funny sounds when you move the wheel back and forth. In fact, when you do your test ride, you should not hear any funny clunking. So this is something you need to pay attention to. And there's one more thing we need to check on the suspension, and that is, of course, the riding height. So you need to measure from the tooling holes underneath the car that the height of the ride is about 120 millimeters or 130 or 110, depends a bit on the model you're looking for. You will find the holes underneath the sills in the front and in the back, and you can measure from the hole in the chassis to the floor the distance, and it should be equal on all four corners. Now you have to place the car on a firm solid ground, and then you can do that. I have a video on that one, and it's called checking the straightness of the chassis. You can check that out on my YouTube channel, because it's a bit labor intensive to do. If you measure the riding height and it's not equal on all four corners, then the chassis could be bent, but you could have a problem with the suspension system, because some vehicles have adjustable suspension systems and they could be off. You may as well have a broken spring, so please pay close attention to that. Check the springs out, check if it's an adjustable suspension, place the car on the flat and horizontal surface, and then measure the distance between the tooling holes and the ground. They should be the same on all 4 points. If it's not the same, I would probably take the car to, or ask to take the car to, a specialist, Lotus dealer or something like that, or a garage that can actually check your chassis straightness. Or you might want to do it yourself and then have a look on my video on that one. So, so far so good. The last thing we need to check on the suspension is actually the toe control link. And the toe control link is a bar that controls the toe in of the rear wheels, and if that bar snaps, then you're really in trouble, because then the car will be totally uncontrollable. In the back of the car you will find the toe control link. This is this bar right here, and that is an adjustable bar to control the toe in of the rear wheel. Now often, if people took the vehicle on a track quite often, or they had wide grip tires, you would actually see cracks on this bar. Now this bar should have no cracks whatsoever. It should completely be intact, and also the bolts that are fitted on that one should be perfect. There should be no damage on that one whatsoever, because that's critical. And Lotus Elise is known to be suffering from issues on the toe control link. So that's what you need to check. If they are bad, you should replace them, and then you should count at least another 300-400 euros for a set of those toe controlling bars with the proper matching parts that you would have to fit on the side. And it's a bit of work, but it's not that bad. And also check that the gator on the drive shaft is intact, and you should check it both at the inner side near to the gearbox, which is over there, and the side towards the wheel. These gators should be actually having no damage or anything. There should be no grease, no nothing on it. If that is the case, then you have to probably replace the gator or the drive shaft, and that's going to run you another 600 euros roughly per side. So one more thing before you take the vehicle on the road test is to check the wear and tear on the tires. There shouldn't be too much wear and tear on one side of the tire. They should look quite all right. Now in the back of the Lotus Elise, well, we have a negative camber, so the wheels are pointing inwards a bit. So you're going to have a bit more wear on the inner side of the tires. Not too much, but the wear should be the same on both sides. And if it's not, then you probably have a geometry problem, and you might have to adjust the camber or the toe-in and the chamfer, and all these different things may have to be adjusted, so you should take it to an adjustment bench to get it all aligned. I have a couple of videos as well on how you can do it yourself, but nevertheless this is about estimating the value of a Lotus Elise when you're on a site and then you're looking at one. So pay attention to that. If the tires have abnormal wear and tear, it's not a disaster, but it means the alignment is off of the vehicle. So count another €100 for the alignment if they don't have to do too much work on it. And then of course you will have to get new tires as well, so which is probably around another €1,000 depending on what kind of tires you're going to put on. So it all starts adding up, but put all this on your notepad because this is what you're going to need at the end to bargain with the guy. All right, so we looked at suspension, we looked at the brakes, we looked at the engine, we looked at the gearbox. So now we're going to look a little bit on the body. Now there is not much to be said about the body because it's darn expensive. You can see how thin these shells are, right? See, this is really thin material, so this can crack very easily and it's very hard to repair. So normally you have a rear clamshell in the back and that should have no cracks or no damage on it. So look for very thin cracks. And if you look closely, you see all these little lines in there that run across this little plate. These are cracks actually inside the structure, and that's an indication of damage that has happened on the car, but they couldn't repair it. You can't repair it unless you replace the whole thing. In it or repairs. Now typically the rear clamshell is not going to have a lot of damage, but the front clamshell will, because there it is so low to the ground, and you might want to check all the way on the bottom on the nose if there is any damage on the clamshell or any repairs, and most likely we'll have a couple of repairs, but if it's done right, it's not an issue. By the way, this is not polyester. So let's have a little bit of a look on the front, because I want to show you something on the crash box, something you really need to check. So normally you would have the clamshell coming over this, and in the front that's where the clamshell attaches to, and you should feel underneath the clamshell if there is any damage, sign of repair, and look for cracks in it. And then if you can, look through the grill and look at this stud. Now this stud should not be rusted or bent or very heavily corroded. So this is an example how the towing stud should not be looking like. You see how it's already been bent here and how it's corroded? This is just asking for trouble. The same is happening on the bottom. So this is not a good condition of a towing stud. So if you see that, avoid it, because that's a stud you're going to use to tow the Elise. Now if you see the stud being bent heavily or damaged, it means it's been towed a couple of times, and most likely the vehicle has done quite some track days. So pay attention to that, because if you have to replace this very simple piece of metal, you have to take the whole front clamshell off, and that will become quite labor intensive and expensive. So another common problem that you'll see with the Lotus Elise is that the windows are not closing all the way to the top. Now normally we have the roof here, and the window should come against the rubbers that you have all around the surrounding. And often you will see a gap on the top or a gap on the sides, and that is because the window is badly adjusted. Now by itself, that's not a big issue, because you can adjust the window on 3 places. And I have a video on that as well. If you want to see it, check my YouTube channel. But if you're trying to buy a car from an owner that has not fixed these windows, that drives with gaps on the window, because then you get wind, then you make the rain inside, that means that this owner doesn't take very well care of his car. So we've looked at many things on this Lotus Elise, and I hope I've been able to give you sufficient information so far. So now we're getting to the actual test ride. As I said before, Make sure that the engine is cold when you arrive, that you can warm it up while you're sitting there. Keep an eye on the temperature range, you know, between 80 to, it can go up and down a bit, up to even 90 and then back down. And then it's time to take it for a test ride. So don't let the guy drive. Drive yourself. Take it easy, take your time, and we'll do a couple of tests on the test drive. The first thing I think we should be doing is driving in a straight line and accelerate on that straight line. Remove your hands from the steering wheel, but keep them close enough just in case you need to interact. Now, while you accelerate, the car should go in a straight line forward. That's what you should try. If it does not, then most likely the alignment of the car is off and you have to get it realigned, and you just hope that they don't have to put too many shims in and adjustments. But that could cost you, you know, between 100 and 300 euros, it all depending on how much work there is on that. So that's one thing you should try to do. Along the same drive, then grab the steering wheel again and hold it in your hands, and then actually apply very slight pressure on the brakes so that the pads are just touching, so you can still drive and feel it. The car shouldn't start shaking. There should be no funny sounds, and the steering wheel should have no jimmy, and the pedal should feel okay. You should not feel any vibration on the brake pedal, because if you have vibration on the brake pedal, that would mean that actually the discs themselves are bent. They are no longer straight. You can't really tell which one it is, but if the pedal vibrates, the brake pedal that is, then you most likely have a problem on the rear calipers if the steering wheel is stable. Yeah, if the steering wheel also has this kind of a little bit of a jimmy on it while you do that slight brake, and you have it on the brake pedal as well, then it's going to be the front brakes for sure that are having that disc problem, and then you need to replace them. And again, as I said, they could run you between 600 and 800 euros depending on what kind of discs you're going to put on and new brake pads. That's a good test. So the next thing you want to do is drive along the same road again and let the steering wheel go again, but keep your hands close enough again just to be safe, and then brake properly, and the car should brake in a straight line. Now obviously the road shouldn't be wet and it should be an equal road and all this, but you know that's not a big deal. So the next thing to do is to swing a bit with the car from the left to the right, and you need to do that to check that there's no funny sounds, clunking sounds, or weird backgrounds when you move to the left or to the right. Clunking sounds should not happen, because if they do happen, that could be an indication that the suspension isn't right, that the bushes are not right, or the uprights are not right, the ball joints on the uprights. But we checked that already, but that could be another indication. Now, it's always better to check it on the road as well than just doing a static check. You should do both. Take a sharp curve to the left, you know, and accelerate at the same time a bit, and listen to any funny sounds, grinding sounds or something like that. And if you can hear these sounds coming from the outer wheels of the curve, that's typically an indication that the bearings on the wheels are gone. Now a bearing runs you about 150 euros a piece per wheel. Then you can turn to the other side, a sharp curve to the right, and then on the left hand side, if you hear that kind of grinding sound, then that would probably be the bearings on the left hand side that are gone. But these are quite uncommon problems, but they may occur. So, and that's about it. So at the end of the day, the guy will be asking a certain price, and you should consider that he already added some extra on top of it. So you should deduct de facto 10% from it to be right. Now let's take an example. Let's take a 2003-2004 Lotus Elise S2 with a moderate amount of kilometers, because we didn't talk about the mileage or the kilometers on it, but let's say around 60,000-70,000 kilometers, which is what probably you should be looking at. They're probably going to ask you about 22,000 euros, 20,000 euros. That seems to be the price range today. But drop down 10%, and then you remember that little checklist or the scratch pad we talked in the beginning where you noted down all the little defects you've seen. Do that and then deduct that sum from the total cost, and tell also the owner why you do that, and then you have a good deal. Now, of course, how much money you want to deduct for all the work you have to do depends if you can do the work yourself or not. But anyway, this is my advice to you if you want to buy Lotus Elise. They are really fun cars to drive, and I'm sure if you buy a good one, you will really enjoy it. If you buy a bad one, you will not enjoy it, believe me. You will have more hassle than anything else. So, good hunting guys, and thank you for watching this video. Bye bye.